The 2008 Tyler Prize laureates will now be presented, and they will each make some brief remarks following their presentation. Acting for the executive committee, I invite Dr. Rosina Bierbaum to come to the podium. She will make the presentation to Professor Mooney.
Thank you, Owen. It is a great honor to help select these iconic figures in the environment to receive the Tyler Prize, but to have two of my personal heroes of the planet receive this award tonight is really a special thrill. Both Hal Mooney and Jim Galloway are prototypical civic scientists, if you will, and unparalleled mentors to all of us in how to use science in the service of society. I'm here to talk about Hal, but I must mention one vignette about Jim. In the early 1980s, when Dr. Galloway appeared in People magazine, he was criticized by some in the ivory tower of academia because it was deemed unseemly for him to be popularizing science. And he really wasn't the centerfold or anything. He was just in People magazine. But I remember from my very early moments when I saw that, working for the Congress, thinking, this is great. If Jim can make acid rain understandable to the public, we just really might have a chance to solve that issue. And now, 25 years later, it is absolutely clear that scientists more like Dr. Galloway and Dr. Mooney are needed. Both of these men are both communicators and educators and scientists and have really dedicated their lives to building the next cadre of environmental leaders as well as creating the scientific underpinnings to make wise environmental policy both domestically and internationally. So I am really very honored to introduce Dr. Harold Mooney as the 2008 John and Alice Tyler Prize winner for environmental achievement. For more than 3 decades, Hal has been a dominant influence in moving ecology from a science in which humans almost never appeared to a discipline today that encompasses the full range from basic science to applied science. And in that time, you've also nurtured and inspired generations of scientists to be partners with you in advancing that agenda. Dr. Mooney's been called a planet doctor. And that's kind of how he thinks. He figures out how things work, what systems interact with what's gone amok, and how we can heal the patient, the Earth. Hal is an amazing ecologist whose inquiries span basic research to application to assessment. He's moved from local to regional to global scale work, and he's integrated it all. He studies species and populations and biomes. He's made breakthrough investigations into how is it that plants adapt to harsh environments, as well as quantifying the impacts of invasive species. He's made major contributions to theory as well, such as the theory of convergent evolution, and he was one of the first ecologists to explore plant processes at truly the global scale. And thanks largely to Dr. Mooney, global ecology is emerging as a distinct field. Equally impressively, as the science work, Dr. Mooney has been a central figure in launching nearly all of the major international ecology programs since 1970, as far as I can tell. And there's a dazzling display of acronyms that he was part of. He was a central figure in SCOPE, the Scientific Committee on Problems of the Environment, IGBP, the International Geosphere-Biosphere Program, IBOY, the International Biodiversity Observation Year, GISP, the Global Invasive Species Program, and most recently, the MEA, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. And the MEA brought thousands of normally unruly ecologists together to produce a report, the first report, on the health of our world's ecosystems. And it is becoming now scientific input to international conventions on biodiversity, on desertification, on wetlands, and I hope on climate change. But lest you think Hal is divine and not human, I do want to tell one humanizing story. When I worked in the White House Science Office, as you know, Al Gore was always reading the latest climate articles, often before we did, and it was really quite unnerving. And to be honest, Gore loved the physical climate science the most, the ocean conveyor belt, the El Nino glacial melt ice cores, and the inexorable CO2 rise. But as an ecologist, I was determined to have him learn about the impacts of climate change on ecosystems. So Gore's schedulers eventually and reluctantly gave Bob Watson and Jerry Melillo and me a 7:30 a.m. slot in the West Wing for this briefing. Okay, who to pick? Well, Hal. It had to be Hal, the great communicator. And so it was. And as Hal was explaining to the Vice President how humans are now capable of changing planetary cycles, he asserted, humans are now responsible for fixing more nitrogen than any other natural process. Mr. Gore said, well, why are humans fixing nitrogen? What's wrong with it? Undaunted, Hal recovered, answered, and continued on. And he concluded his briefing grandly. You see, Mr. Vice President, it is not a simple matter to determine how the terrestrial biosphere will respond to increasing carbon dioxide and nitrogen. We can't assume a warmer, wetter world will be a greener world. Plant nutrient ratios are stoichiometrically fixed. There was that word fix again. Gore's eyes crossed. But he said in a deadpan way, Dr. Mooney, of course I know what you mean, but could you please explain to the head of NOAA, Jim Baker, what you meant? Stoichiometrically fixed? What were you thinking? But Mr. Gore did learn about the ecological impacts of climate change that day, and Hal Mooney gave him his very first lesson, as Hal has done for legions of students and environmental leaders. I want to close by again elevating Hal to the sublime with quotes from his nominators who are in the room with us tonight. Others might be better known, but Dr. Mooney has achieved more because he has empowered, inspired, and enabled the vast international scientific community to be relevant. Mooney has done more for the well-being of the planet than any other scientist alive. That's quite a legacy. I give you our 2008 Tyler Prize winner, Dr. Harold Mooney.
So lovely.
And the check.
And the check.
Could have made that part, huh?
Thank you.
Right, you don't have to give my speech, I'll give.
Okay. What to say after that? I don't know. Thank you very much for such a glorious introduction, Rosina. You didn't quite get it right, though. I remember very distinctly, I don't know why I was talking about nitrogen deposition anyway. That's Galloway's territory, but I thought that he needed some help. But I remember Al Gore as one of his assistants, his environmental advisor, after I...
Katie McGinty?
Yes, Katie McGinty. She says, oh, yes, endocrine disruptors. She thought that's what I was talking about. About then I gave up. Anyway, usually I'm not nervous at something like this, but when people all have, formal dress on, it makes you kind of nervous. What's going on here? But I'll try to calm down, and I only have 5 pages of notes. 4 of them are backups in case I lose the other ones. First, I'd like to correct Owen. Owen, you forgot to acknowledge one other laureate that we lost this past year. One I spoke about yesterday at the presentation. That's Bert Bolin, an incredible scientist and who's made such a difference, to all of our lives through his work on the IPCC. So I'd like to recognize his passing also. I'd like to thank John and Alice Tyler for setting this process in motion 35 years ago. What I talked about yesterday is this last 50 years when the great sort of devastation of our natural capital has been going on, and they early recognized that we needed to call more attention to this by setting up this award. And the award is run very, very well. As you see, incredibly distinguished executive committee. And if those of you who follow science and the development of science in this country over the past years, you'll see these names have popped up so many times. Every time I read a document about some new really important initiative, or the names of some of those people on the executive committee will be there. And then the executive director, Linda Duguay, she's extraordinary. I don't know how many emails I exchanged with her during the last month or so. And I think that she's doing a terrific job along with the staff. And one of the important things about the Tyler Award is how much attention they give to publicizing the event. And I know many other awards that don't even come close to it. So I think it's important to keep, the environment, the award up front, and I think that team is doing a terrific job in making that happen. Well, it's certainly a privilege, of course, to be here. I mean, how could I possibly associate my name with so many of those very distinguished past laureates who set the foundation for all that we know in this area, the incredible group of people. And to share the podium here with Jim Galloway, who is, I'm going to be nice tonight. I promised. We kid each other a lot. I don't know why, but we have a very good relationship. We've worked together the past few years, and he's done some superb work, and we're going to hear about that. Well, I have a metric for happiness. It's simple. You have a happy and supportive family. And luckily, I have that. My wife, Sherry's here, who gives some stability to our family, and very, very supportive. Tolerates a lot of stuff and complains not too much. So, got the happy family. Then you need talented and engaged colleagues, faculty, and students, and boy, I've had that in spades. I've been really lucky. And I'll talk a little bit about them shortly here. And then the third thing for a really happy life is you can bike to work. And I was able to do that also. So most people that they get 2 out of 3, they made it, but I got 3 out of 3, so I'm really pleased. Well, I'd like to acknowledge a number of people in this room who have made a real difference in my career. I've been very, very fortunate that some of them are here tonight. My faculty colleagues, Joe Barry, his wife Lisa. When I first went to Stanford, I worked with Joe and Ola, and they taught me about quality science and how to do it. And we had many years doing great work together. I'd like to thank Rodolfo Dursto, who's here, has recently joined our faculty and has brought enormous inspiration to me personally. His great work in tropical forests and conservation, and his incredible teacher. I mean, the students just flock to him, and he teaches not only at Stanford, but in Mexico and in places in Latin America, bringing students from Stanford as well, bringing students from all over Latin America. So it's wonderful that you're here with your wife, Guillermina. She's not going to dance for you tonight. She's a wonderful dancer, but we had a birthday celebration recently when she did dance. And then I've been blessed with postdocs who've really inspired me, and one's here tonight, Steve Davis and his wife Janet. I don't know where Steve is, but Steve is a remarkable scientist, but he's an extraordinary, not just a good teacher, not just an excellent teacher, but an extraordinary teacher. And in fact, he was recognized as such for a international award just last year for the most outstanding science teacher in the country and globally. So it's great that you're here, Steve. Students, now this is, they're the past students. Now they're my mentors and sources of inspiration, and some of the older students here, and some newer ones. Nona Chiriello is here, just a remarkable woman, who has done so many wonderful things. She runs the science program at Jasper Ridge at Stanford University. It's a very important facility for all scientists at Stanford, and she keeps that all going so well. And there's Chris Field, who's here. Chris Field this very morning, got on an airplane in Budapest to fly here. And what Chris Field was doing in Budapest is really important to all of us here. He was planning the next IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. As you all know, that exercise has now pushed us to the tipping point of finally doing something about climate change 30 years after the global science community said we have a problem. But I think now that the IPCC and Al Gore and things like that have pushed us to where something is going to happen. So thank you, Chris, for all of the things that you've done and are doing. He's the chair of a brand new department called Global Ecology at Carnegie Institution, and he participates in so many global initiatives and activities, but his work right now in the IPCC is really central. And some newer students, Elsa Cleland, there she is, with her husband, John Niles. Elsa worked on our big experiments in Jasper Ridge. She's now a new professor at UC San Diego. It's just fantastic to have you move now from being a glorious graduate student to a new career. Then close colleagues, Jane Lubchenco and Bruce Mengi, both very central figures in marine biology. Jane has taught me all I know about trying to bring science to the general public and working with the policy community. She's been an incredible mentor to me and to so many people, so many students. And she was past president of the AAAS. She was past president of the International Council for Science. She's been an extraordinary leader, and Bruce has taught so many great students. So we're lucky to have them here with me. So they've been inspirations for me, and so warms my heart to see them right here to share this special moment for me. Now I'm going to acknowledge just a couple more things. One is something we don't talk about too much. We glorify individuals like Rodolfo and so forth, all the tremendous work he does, and Chris and others. But there's something besides the inspiration of their students and colleagues. There's some glue out there that makes things happen. And most of them work for organizations like ICSU. I mentioned International Council for Science. We mentioned SCOPE and Diversitas. These are international programs which have a staff, and they keep things together. They make it possible for scientists to meet and to discuss things, and then when they go back to their job, they keep it running. And so I'd just like to acknowledge the glue that's made my career possible, and to give them more recognition. They fuel the engine, and it's so hard to get funds to fuel the engine. It's easy to get money for new science, but it's hard to keep these things going. And Ann Schramm, and from my own office, who's helped me so much, and in addition to Sherry, sort of tells me which direction I'm supposed to go that particular day. And finally, I would just like to close briefly on some of the things I talked about yesterday. I talked about the triangle, the crisis that we're in. The last 50 years, we've seen enormous change, enormous depletion of resources, and I mentioned how the predictions for the future are it's going to go a lot faster because of climate change, because of globalization, and so forth. And I said we've got to do something new, we've got to do something different, and we've got to do something a lot faster. We've got to be more responsive. The science community's got to be more responsive. The policy community has to be more responsive and quicker on the uptake. And how that's going to happen, I think, is going to be working the triangle, as I call it. That is the science, the policy, and the public. The general public being, the private sector and the press and the public in general. And we've got to learn how to communicate faster and better, because right now I think the general public still doesn't get it on some of these things, and that's our fault. And unless the public gets it, the policy community isn't going to act. So that's what has to happen, and it's got to happen fast. I think we got to think for new ways to do that, and we have the people, the inspiration right in this room to make that happen. The people I just talked about are going to be doing that. So thank you very much for your attention and for the award and for just being here. Bye-bye.